I don't know uh, what's going to happen on election day, given what I saw last night. I just don't know what's going to happen. It was concerning. I mean, thankfully, I wasn't assaulted, but I know people were very afraid. Imagine trying to exit the White House and not being sure that your personal safety is going to be protected because there are the communist insurrectionists that you know have a history of violence standing right outside in the middle of the street. We're facing all of these, I call it a communist insurrection across the land in many cities. Portland, you have the Black Lives Matters assaults on the rule of law in Kenosha in response to a police-involved shooting. And even here in Washington, D.C., you had supporters of President Trump attacked and assaulted. In fact, a United States Senator Rand Paul could have been killed if there happened to if there didn't if there weren't just happened to be a DC police officer or two around him as he was leaving the White House last night at after that inauguration event. Yeah, I went to that event in my personal capacity. I wasn't officially representing Judicial Watch, and as we were leaving, they had surrounded the White House, the communist insurrectionists, and they were harassing people as they were leaving the White House. The police weren't protecting anyone, it seemed, in large measure. You'll probably seen the videos with the attacks on Rand Paul. Dan Bongino, who you probably know from Fox News and his the Bongino Report, and he's got a great podcast. He reports he was harassed, he and his wife, for a mile. They followed him for a mile, threatening him. And I don't know what the DC police were doing. I don't know even what the feds were doing, but I do know that there were 1,000 Americans plus guests of the President of the United States who were fearful for their personal safety as they were exiting the White House. And some were assaulted. Rand Paul was assaulted. There's no doubt about it. He says his life was saved by the police. He was in fear for his life. So I don't know what the president can do legally. Well, I kind of do know. Certainly in the District of Columbia, he can declare an emergency and federalize the DC police. I'll talk about later with Mayor Bowser, with her promotion of uh, 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 Black Lives Matter and defund the police propaganda. Is it any surprise that American citizens were assaulted after leaving the Trump White House last night? And that the DC police were not available to provide the necessary protection? Now, there were police in the area, but they weren't providing the protection you would think. You were risking your personal safety exiting the White House. And if that's going on in our nation's capital during a convention, what is going to happen during an election? What is going to happen during an election? You know, these are dangerous times we're living in. We've never faced the threat of political violence like we have, at least in recent memory. You'd have to go back 50 plus years. And now we're facing it. And the question is, are local and federal officials doing enough? The president's been bringing pressure to bear. He's facing what I call sedition within his own administration to fully enforce the law. When the Pentagon has made it clear that they will mutiny if he dares to declare the Insurrection Act or to invoke the Insurrection Act. So in the meantime, what happens is, and like in the case of Kenosha, you had killings take place as a result of the civil unrest, to put it charitably. That 17-year-old allegedly shot and killed 2 people, all of which was preventable. Riots take place because of political decisions by local officials not to enforce the law. And only after those killings took place and there was outrageous violence further did the leftist governor of Wisconsin accept the president's offer of additional National Guard and other federal law enforcement personnel. and now Kenosha evidently is relatively quiet. In my view, the president should not wait for the governors to ask. He should declare invoke the Insurrection Act as soon as anything pops up and move in. That's what the law is there for. We can't have nights and nights of rioting, and I don't know who is telling the president he shouldn't step in. I mean, we all know what the president would do, and we should encourage him to do the right thing here and to take more aggressive action. I don't know what's going to happen on Election Day, given what I saw last night. I just don't know what's going to happen. It was concerning. I mean, thankfully, I wasn't assaulted, but I know people were very afraid. Imagine trying to exit the White House and not being sure that your personal safety is going to be protected because there are the communist insurrectionists that you know have a history of violence standing right outside in the middle of the street. Complete mayhem, complete mayhem in our nation's capital. So in the least, the president should assert authority in the nation's capitals to make sure that the government can operate, that people can visit the White House without fear of injury. It was terrible, absolutely terrible. And Judicial Watch has a series of Freedom of Information Act requests on some of this violence, and we're doing what we can. But we're not the cops. We're not the National Guard. We're not the military. So pressure local, pressure state, and pressure federal officials to preserve our Constitution, our Republican form of government across the land. Some people say, well, Portland, they vote for those people, or they vote for those leftists in Oregon. I see the governor of Oregon said, the violence has got to stop. After 3 months, she says the violence has got to stop. It reminded me of the old Don Rickles joke. Don Rickles says, oh, Frank Sinatra, he's a great guy. He saved my life. He goes, I was in a parking lot once and these toughs were beating me up. And Frank Sinatra came along and said, all right, boys, that's enough. That's what the governor of Oregon is like. She's been basically an ally of the violent protesters. It's been awful. And the good people of Portland, because we presume they're the good people of Portland. Not everyone in Portland is a communist insurrectionist. There are people trying to live their lives. There are citizens who have a right to try to live their lives, have a constitutional right to a Republican form of government. And the president has the authority, and it's exactly for these purposes the president has the authority to make sure that those citizens are protected. So I've been pushing and pushing and pushing for him to invoke the Insurrection Act. I know virtually no one in the administration wants to do it, probably other than the president. So I would encourage him to keep on pushing for that action. And in Washington, D.C., he doesn't even need to technically invoke the Insurrection Act to have the feds take over the district police. All he has to do is declare an emergency. And that's what he should do. Because what happened last night is completely unacceptable. And we can't trust this mayor to protect those who she politically disagrees with. That's pretty clear. This was foreseeable. This was foreseeable. Before the event began, the leftists, the communists had been gathering. It was evident what was happening. And sure enough, they were assaulting, as I said, they were threatening and assaulting 1,000+ Americans, including senior government officials leaving the White House. Unbelievable, unbelievable. This is why our nation's capital is supposed to be run by Congress, is supposed to be run by president. And this is why home rule is a constitutional abomination. It's not supposed to be this way. because when you have a local politician running the nation's capital, that gives them power over the operations of the federal government. The Constitution specifically was to set up the district to avoid. That's why the district is supposed to be run ultimately by Congress. But of course, they've outsourced it to the politicians here in Washington, D.C. And I know there's all this talk about democracy and home rule. The District of Columbia is democratically run under our constitutional system by Congress. And if you're a citizen of the District of Columbia, that's the reality. And if you don't want to be a citizen under those circumstances, there's nothing requiring you to stay here. But the Constitution should rule in the District of Columbia, not this Home Rule Act, which undermines our constitutional system and has now placed the ability of Congress and of the president and other functions of government at risk. So it ought to be removed.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.